The golden carriage rolled through the cobblestone streets of Aldermere, its wheels creating a steady rhythm that echoed off the ancient stone buildings. Crowds had gathered on both sides of the main boulevard, their faces bright with excitement as they waited to catch a glimpse of their beloved Queen Isabella. Children sat on their father's shoulders waving small silk flags, while merchants had closed their shops early to join the celebration. Captain Marcus Thornfield rode beside the royal carriage on his black stallion, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the crowd. At 35, he was the youngest captain ever appointed to lead the Queen's Royal Guard, a position he had earned through 15 years of unwavering dedication and an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it struck. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles fought in service to the crown, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing. The procession was magnificent to behold. 12 mounted guards in gleaming silver armor rode in perfect formation, their ceremonial swords catching the afternoon sunlight. Behind them came the royal carriage, painted in deep royal blue with gold trim, pulled by 4 magnificent white horses whose manes had been braided with silk ribbons. The Queen sat inside, visible through the crystal windows, wearing her ceremonial crown and waving gracefully to her subjects. This was no ordinary day in the kingdom. Queen Isabella was traveling to the great cathedral to commemorate the 25th anniversary of her coronation. The entire city had been decorated for weeks in preparation. Colorful banners hung from every window, flower petals covered the streets, and the air was filled with the sound of church bells ringing in celebration, but Captain Thornfield felt uneasy. Something about this day felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what was bothering him. His instincts had kept the Queen safe for over a decade, and those same instincts were now whispering warnings he couldn't ignore. He had personally inspected the route 3 times, stationed additional guards at every corner, and questioned dozens of local residents about anything unusual they might have noticed. The crowd was larger than expected. People had traveled from neighboring villages and even distant provinces to witness this historic celebration. They pressed against the wooden barriers that lined the street, their faces filled with joy and excitement. Children threw flower petals in the air, and musicians played festive tunes from various street corners. As the procession moved through the heart of the city, Captain Thornfield noticed a small girl standing near a fruit vendor's cart. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with long brown hair tied in simple braids and wearing a plain blue dress that looked well worn but clean. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, but her behavior. While everyone around her was cheering, waving, and trying to get closer to the carriage, she stood perfectly still, her dark eyes focused intently on him. The girl's name was Elena Brightwater, and she lived with her grandmother in a small apartment above the bakery on Merchant's Row. Her grandmother, Martha, had raised her since she was 3 years old, after Elena's parents died in a terrible fire that swept through the textile district. Despite their modest circumstances, Martha had taught Elena to read and write, skills that were rare among children of their social standing. Elena was not like other children her age. She was observant in ways that often surprised adults, noticing things that others missed and asking questions that showed a wisdom beyond her years. Her grandmother often said that Elena had old eyes that seemed to see more than they should at such a young age. On this particular morning, Elena had convinced her grandmother to let her watch the royal procession from the streets. They had found a good spot near the fruit vendor, where Elena could see over the heads of most adults. She had been excited about seeing the Queen, having heard countless stories about the wise and kind ruler who had brought peace and prosperity to their kingdom. But as the procession approached, something made Elena's stomach twist with worry. She had noticed men in the crowd who didn't seem to belong. They weren't cheering or celebrating like everyone else. Instead, they stood silent and watchful, their eyes following the royal guard with an intensity that made Elena uncomfortable. 3 of these men had positioned themselves at strategic points along the route. One stood near the old stone fountain, another had blended into the crowd near the baker's shop, and the third was positioned close to where the procession would turn toward the cathedral. They were dressed like common citizens, But there was something about the way they carried themselves that reminded Elena of the soldiers she sometimes saw training in the castle courtyard. Elena had an unusual gift. She could read people's faces and body language in ways that most adults couldn't. Her grandmother had always said it was because Elena had learned to survive by watching and listening, skills she had developed after losing her parents. This ability had served her well in their neighborhood, helping her avoid troublesome situations and navigate the complex social dynamics of city life. As she watched these suspicious men, Elena noticed that they were all looking at something specific, not the queen or the carriage, but the captain of the royal guard. She followed their gaze and saw Captain Thornfield riding proudly beside the carriage, his attention focused on the crowd. The men's eyes tracked his movements with a precision that made Elena's heart race. She tried to tell her grandmother about what she had noticed, but the noise of the crowd made it impossible to communicate effectively. Martha was caught up in the excitement of seeing the queen and wasn't paying attention to Elena's increasingly urgent tugs on her sleeve. The procession was getting closer, and Elena could see that whatever these men were planning would happen soon. The girl realized that she needed to warn Captain Thornfield directly. But how could a small child get the attention of the most important guard in the kingdom? She couldn't simply shout out her concerns. Who would believe her, and what if she was wrong? But what if she was right, and her failure to act resulted in harm coming to the queen? Elena remembered a story her grandmother had told her about the old kingdom's secret signals. During times of war, citizens would use subtle hand gestures to communicate with royal messengers without alerting enemy spies. Martha had learned these signals from her own grandmother, who had lived through the Great War 50 years earlier. One particular signal had stuck in Elena's memory, a specific gesture that meant danger, approaching from multiple directions. It involved placing her right hand over her heart while extending her left arm with the palm facing down, then slowly raising and lowering her left hand 3 times. As the royal procession drew nearer, Elena positioned herself where she would be clearly visible to Captain Thornfield. Her heart was pounding so hard she was afraid others might hear it, but she forced herself to remain calm. This might be her only chance to warn him about the suspicious men she had identified. When Captain Thornfield's gaze swept across her section of the crowd, Elena took a deep breath and executed the ancient warning signal. She placed her right hand over her heart, extended her left arm with her palm facing downward, and slowly raised and lowered her hand 3 times, all while maintaining direct eye contact with the captain. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Captain Thornfield's eyes widened in recognition, and he pulled hard on his horse's reins, bringing his mount to an abrupt stop. The sudden halt caused a chain reaction throughout the procession as guards and carriage drivers struggled to avoid collisions. "Halt! Stop the procession!" Captain Thornfield's voice boomed across the street, cutting through the celebration. Noise like a sword through silk, the entire royal procession ground to a stop in the middle of the crowded boulevard. The Queen's carriage lurched forward slightly before coming to rest, and Queen Isabella's surprised face appeared at the window, her royal composure momentarily shaken by the unexpected interruption. The crowd's cheering gradually faded into confused murmurs as people tried to understand what was happening. Some thought it might be part of the ceremony, while others worried that something terrible had occurred. The festive atmosphere began to shift into one of uncertainty and concern. Captain Thornfield dismounted his horse with fluid grace and strode directly toward Elena, his expression serious but not unkind. The crowd parted before him, creating a clear path between the imposing guard captain and the small girl who had somehow commanded his attention. Elena stood her ground, though her knees felt weak with fear and adrenaline. She had never been so close to someone so important, and the weight of the moment pressed down on her small shoulders. But she knew that what she had observed was important enough to risk looking foolish or getting into trouble. "Child," Captain Thornfield said in a voice that was stern but gentle, "you used an old signal that has not been seen in this kingdom for many years. Where did you learn such a thing?" Elena's voice trembled slightly as she answered, "My grandmother taught me, sir." She said it was used during the Great War to warn of danger. The captain knelt down to Elena's eye level, bringing his intimidating presence closer to her height. Up close, she could see that his gray eyes were kind, despite their intensity, and that the scars on his face spoke of a life spent protecting others. And what D? The tension in the crowded street was thick as morning fog. Captain Thornfield's sharp commands had transformed the festive celebration into a military operation within minutes. Royal Guards moved through the crowd with practiced stealth, their hands resting casually on their sword hilts while their eyes tracked the three suspicious individuals Elena had identified. Elena remained close to Captain Thornfield's side, her small hand clutched tightly in her grandmother's weathered fingers. Martha Brightwater's face had gone pale when she realized her granddaughter had somehow become involved in what appeared to be a serious threat to the Queen's safety. "Grandmother?" Elena whispered urgently. "I had to tell him." Those men were planning something terrible. Martha squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "You did the right thing, child. Your parents would be proud of your courage." Meanwhile, the three suspicious men had begun to realize that their cover was blown. The man near the fountain, a scarred individual with prematurely gray hair, noticed the guards moving toward his position and subtly signaled to his companions. His name was Victor Darkmoor, a former Royal Guard who had been dismissed from service 5 years earlier for selling information to enemy kingdoms. The second man, positioned near the bakery, was Thomas Ashworth, a blacksmith whose family had lost their land in a border dispute that Queen Isabella had ruled against them. His resentment had grown into hatred over the years, and he had joined Darkmoor's plot for revenge. The third conspirator, closest to the cathedral turn, was perhaps the most dangerous of all. Sir Roderick Blackthorne had once been a knight of the realm, but his gambling debts and corrupt practices had led to his exile. He had spent 2 years planning his return and his revenge against the crown that had stripped him of his honors. These 3 men had spent months planning what they believed would be the perfect assassination. They had studied the Queen's route, identified weaknesses in the security arrangements, and positioned themselves where they could create chaos that would allow them to reach the royal carriage. Their plan had been flawless, until a small girl with observant eyes had spotted them. "Captain." Thornfield spoke quietly into a small communication device that connected him to his guards throughout the area. "Report positions and status. Alpha team in position near the fountain. Target is aware of surveillance and showing signs of nervousness," came the first response. "Beta team approaching the bakery. Second target is reaching for something concealed beneath his cloak," reported another guard. "Gamma team has eyes on the third target near the cathedral approach. He's signaling to someone we haven't identified yet." Captain Thornfield's jaw tightened. "There may be more than 3. Keep scanning for additional threats." Elena tugged gently on the captain's armored sleeve. "Sir, there's something else." He looked down at her with respect that surprised many of the adults watching the interaction. "What else have you observed, Elena?" "The man by the fountain? He's been watching the guards' patterns for weeks. I've seen him in the market square. On different days, always in places where he could see the castle gates." This information sent a chill through Captain Thornfield's experienced heart. If these conspirators had been conducting surveillance for weeks, they knew far more about royal security procedures than he had initially assumed. "Lieutenant Morrison," he called to his second-in-command. "We need to assume they know our standard protocols." "Switch to Emergency Formation 7, Morrison nodded grimly. Formation 7 was reserved for the highest level of threats, situations where the enemy was assumed to have inside knowledge of royal security procedures. As the guards shifted into their new formation, the crowd became increasingly agitated. What had started as excited murmuring was now growing into genuine concern and fear. Some people were beginning to push toward the edges of the street, seeking escape routes in case violence erupted. Queen Isabella, still seated in her royal carriage, finally decided she needed to understand what was happening. She opened the carriage door slightly and called out in her clear, authoritative voice, "Captain Thornfield, please approach the carriage immediately." The captain moved swiftly to the Queen's side. bowing respectfully while keeping his eyes alert for any sudden movements in the crowd. Your Majesty, we have identified a potential threat to your safety. I recommend we abort the procession and return to the castle immediately. Queen Isabella's intelligent brown eyes surveyed the scene around them. At 52, she had ruled the kingdom for 25 years and had survived 3 previous assassination attempts. She understood the gravity of the situation, but she also understood the importance of not appearing weak before her subjects. How credible is this threat, Captain? She asked quietly. Very credible, Your Majesty. A young citizen identified suspicious individuals who have been conducting surveillance of our security procedures. They appear to be positioned for a coordinated attack. The Queen glanced toward Elena, who stood bravely beside her grandmother despite the dangerous situation unfolding around her. That child warned you? Yes, Your Majesty. She used an ancient signal from the time of the Great War. Someone taught her well. Queen Isabella nodded thoughtfully. Throughout her reign, she had learned to trust Captain Thornfield's judgment completely. If he said the threat was real, then immediate action was necessary, but before any decisions could be made, the situation escalated dramatically. Victor Darkmoor, realizing that delay would only allow more guards to surround him, suddenly drew a curved dagger from beneath his cloak and lunged toward the nearest royal guard. His attack was swift and vicious, driven by years of resentment and desperation. Now! He shouted to his accomplices as he engaged the guard in combat. The peaceful celebration erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran in all directions as the reality of the danger became clear. Parents grabbed their children and sought shelter behind buildings, while vendors abandoned their carts in their haste to escape. Thomas Ashworth pulled a crossbow from beneath his blacksmith's apron and aimed it directly at Queen Isabella's carriage. But before he could fire, one of Captain Thornfield's guards tackled him to the ground, sending the crossbow bolt harmlessly into the air. Sir Roderick Blackthorne proved to be the most dangerous of the 3 conspirators. Instead of immediately attacking, he whistled sharply, a signal that brought 4 additional men out of hiding places throughout the crowd. These reinforcements had been positioned as a backup plan, ready to create maximum chaos if the primary assassination attempt failed. Protect the Queen! Captain Thornfield's voice boomed over the sounds of combat and panic. The royal guards moved with deadly efficiency, their years of training evident in every movement. But the attackers had the advantage of surprise and desperation, making them extremely dangerous opponents. Elena found herself in the middle of a battlefield. Her grandmother tried to pull her toward safety, but the crowd was so dense and panicked that movement in any direction was nearly impossible. She could see Captain Thornfield fighting 2 attackers. Simultaneously, his sword work a masterpiece of skill and precision. Despite her fear, Elena's sharp mind continued to observe and analyze the unfolding battle. She noticed that one of the new attackers was moving systematically toward the royal carriage, while the guards were engaged with his companions. This man carried a small bottle filled with liquid that glowed with an unusual green light. "Captain!" Elena screamed over the noise of battle. "The man with the green bottle, he's going for the carriage." Captain Thornfield dispatched one of his opponents with a swift sword thrust and turned to see the threat Elena had identified. The man with the bottle was indeed approaching the royal carriage, and the captain realized with horror what the glowing liquid must be: alchemist's fire. A substance that burned through metal and could not be extinguished with water. If that bottle broke against the carriage, Queen Isabella would be trapped inside a furnace of green flames. With a burst of speed that impressed even his experienced guards, Captain Thornfield sprinted across the battlefield toward the approaching assassin. But he was too far away and other attackers blocked his path. Elena watched in horror as the man with the bottle raised his arm to throw the deadly substance at the Queen's carriage. Time seemed to slow as she realized that no one else was in position to stop him, without thinking about her own safety. Elena broke free from her grandmother's protective grip and ran directly at the assassin. She was small and quick, able to dart between the legs of fighting men and avoid the chaos that surrounded her. The assassin was so focused on his target that he didn't notice the small girl approaching until she collided with his legs at full speed. The impact wasn't enough to knock him down, but it was enough to throw off his aim as he released the bottle of alchemist's fire. Instead of striking the royal carriage, the bottle arced through the air and crashed against the stone wall of a nearby building, where it exploded in a burst of green flames that illuminated the entire street. The assassin turned toward Elena, with rage in his eyes, raising his dagger to strike down the child who had ruined his mission. But before his blade could fall, Captain Thornfield arrived like an avenging angel, his sword finding its mark with lethal precision. The battle was not yet over, but the tide had turned decisively in favor of the row. The smoke from the alchemist's fire had finally cleared, leaving only the acrid smell of burnt stone and the memory of green flames that had nearly claimed a kingdom's future. The cobblestone street, once decorated with flower petals and celebration banners, now bore the scars of battle, scattered weapons, overturned vendor carts, and the dark stains where wounded men had fallen. Queen Isabella stepped gracefully from her royal carriage, her composure remarkable for someone who had just survived a sophisticated assassination attempt. Her ceremonial crown still sat perfectly upon her head, and her royal blue gown remained pristine despite the chaos that had erupted around her. She moved with purpose toward the small group gathered around Elena and Captain Thornfield. "Clear the area," Captain Thornfield commanded his guards. "Establish a security perimeter and ensure all civilians are safely evacuated." But Queen Isabella raised her hand, stopping the evacuation order. "No, Captain. Our people deserve to see that their queen stands unharmed, and they deserve to witness justice being served. The remaining crowd, those brave or curious enough to have stayed despite the danger, formed a respectful circle around the royal party. Many had their children on their shoulders again, but now the mood was different, no longer purely celebratory, but filled with awe and respect for what they had witnessed. Elena stood quietly beside her grandmother, still processing the reality of what had occurred. Her torn blue dress and dirt-stained face told the story of her involvement in the battle, but her dark eyes remained alert and intelligent. Already analyzing the new situation developing around her, Queen Isabella approached Elena directly, ignoring protocol that would normally require the child to be presented formally. As she drew near, the queen knelt down in the dusty street, bringing herself to Elena's eye level in a gesture that shocked every noble and commoner present. "Elena Brightwater," Queen Isabella said in her clear, musical voice that carried easily across the silent crowd, "you have displayed wisdom beyond your years and courage beyond measure. Your keen observations and brave actions have saved not only my life, but preserved the peace and stability of our entire kingdom." Elena curtsied as best she could in her torn dress, the way her grandmother had taught her. "Your Majesty, I only did what anyone would have done." A gentle smile crossed the queen's face. "Child, what you did today is something most adults would never have the courage or wisdom to attempt. You saw danger where trained soldiers missed it. You communicated that danger using knowledge that most have forgotten. And when the moment of greatest peril arrived, you acted without thought for your own safety." Captain Thornfield stepped forward, removing his ceremonial helmet to reveal his graying hair and the full extent of his battle scars. "Your Majesty, with your permission, I would like to tell Elena and her grandmother exactly what their actions prevented today." Queen Isabella nodded, understanding the importance of ensuring that everyone present understood the true gravity of what had been averted. "The men you helped us capture were not common criminals or simple assassins," Captain Thornfield explained, his voice carrying the weight of long experience with such matters. "Victor Darkmoor was once one of my own guards, dismissed for betraying crown secrets. Thomas Ashworth had been planning revenge against your Majesty for years. And Sir Roderick Blackthorne—" He paused, his expression growing darker. "Blackthorne had connections to enemies of our kingdom beyond our borders." Martha Brightwater gasped, finally understanding that her granddaughter had become involved in something far more significant than a simple threat to the royal procession. "If their plot had succeeded," Queen Isabella continued, "it would not have ended with my death. These conspirators had planned to create chaos that would allow foreign armies to invade during the confusion." "Elena," Your sharp eyes and brave heart may have saved thousands of lives and prevented a war that could have torn our kingdom apart." The crowd that had gathered to hear these words began to murmur among themselves, the full implications of what the small girl had accomplished becoming clear to them. Parents looked at their own children with wonder, imagining how they would have reacted in such a situation. Elena felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. She had simply noticed men who seemed out of place and had remembered a signal her grandmother had taught her. The idea that these simple actions had prevented a war seemed impossible to believe. "Your Majesty," Elena said hesitantly, "my grandmother taught me to watch and listen because that's how people like us survive. I didn't know I was preventing anything so important." Queen Isabella's expression grew thoughtful. "Elena, that is precisely why your actions were so valuable. You saw the truth because you weren't blinded by assumptions or expectations. You watched with clear eyes and acted with a pure heart." Captain Thornfield had been observing this exchange with growing admiration for both the Queen's wisdom and Elena's character. An idea had been forming in his mind, one that could benefit both the kingdom and this remarkable child. "Your Majesty," he said formally, "I would like to propose something unprecedented." Queen Isabella turned to him with interest. "Speak your mind, Captain." "Elena Brightwater has demonstrated abilities that could serve our kingdom in ways we have never considered. She sees patterns that trained guards miss, she understands the importance of forgotten knowledge, and she has proven her loyalty and courage beyond question." The crowd leaned forward, eager to hear what the captain was suggesting. "I propose that Elena be granted a position in the Royal Academy of Strategic Studies, where her natural gifts can be properly developed and channeled in service to the crown." A collective gasp arose from the crowd. The Royal Academy was reserved for the children of nobles and wealthy merchants. No child from the working district had ever been offered such an opportunity. Martha Brightwater felt her knees grow weak. The idea of her granddaughter receiving the education of a noble was beyond anything she had ever dared to dream, but Elena herself looked uncertain. "Captain Thornfield, Your Majesty, I don't want to leave my grandmother. She's all the family I have left." Queen Isabella smiled warmly. "My dear child, who said anything about leaving your grandmother? If you accept this opportunity, arrangements will be made for both of you. The kingdom owes a debt to your entire family for raising such a remarkable young woman." The Queen stood and addressed the crowd in her official voice. "Let it be known throughout the kingdom that Elena Brightwater, daughter of our city, has this day proven herself a defender of the realm. She shall be granted a full education at the Royal Academy, and her family shall be provided with a home befitting their new status as friends of the crown." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing off the stone buildings, as they celebrated this unprecedented honor being bestowed on one of their own. Elena looked up at her grandmother, seeking guidance in this moment that would change their lives forever. Martha's eyes were filled with tears of pride and joy. "Grandmother," Elena whispered, "is this really happening?" Martha knelt down and embraced her granddaughter tightly. "Elena, my brave girl, this is happening because of who you are and what you've done. Your parents would be so proud of the woman you're becoming." Captain Thornfield stepped forward once more. "Elena, there is something else you should know. The signal you used today, the warning gesture your grandmother taught you, that knowledge saved more than just today's situation. There are other old signals and forgotten wisdom that could help protect our kingdom in the future. Would you be willing to help us preserve and understand these ancient ways?" Elena's eyes brightened with genuine excitement for the first time since the crisis had begun. "You mean I could help make sure other people remember the important things that might be forgotten?" "Exactly," the captain replied. "You could become a keeper of knowledge, ensuring that the wisdom of previous generations is never lost again." Queen Isabella looked around at the crowd of her subjects, seeing in their faces the same wonder and inspiration that Elena's story had awakened in her own heart. "Citizens of Aldermere," she announced, "today we witnessed something extraordinary. We saw that heroism comes not from titles or wealth, but from character and courage. We learned that wisdom can be found in the most unexpected places. and that the safety of a kingdom sometimes depends on the sharp eyes and brave heart of a single individual who chooses to act. When action is needed, the queen paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. Elena Brightwater represents the very best of our people, observant, knowledgeable, courageous, and selfless. She will be honored not only for what she has done, but as an example of what any citizen of our kingdom can accomplish when they combine wisdom with bravery. As the sun began to set over the city of Aldermere, casting long shadows across the street where history had been made, Elena found herself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond her own life. The royal procession that had been interrupted by danger was now resumed, but with a significant addition. Elena and Martha Brightwater rode in a special carriage provided by the Queen, following the royal coach to the great cathedral where the anniversary celebration would conclude with a special recognition ceremony. As they traveled through the city streets, crowds that had